My name is John Ford. Mark, I put that there because I think that's the most interesting thing that's ever come out of anything I've ever done. Certainly out of the open classes. I'll sort of tell you, explain a bit more why in a little bit. Martin asked me to speak about some of the projects that I've been working on. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects. Starting with this photography class that I opened out some time ago. I think it's probably worthwhile just contextualising what I am and what I do as well, because I'm guessing that you're not all photographers in the room. Maybe not. So, my business model as an editorial photographer was dependent on 2 things. It depended on people paying for the mode of delivery, so usually that was the magazine or the newspaper, and it depended on a scarce supply of my product. So I would make photographs of people and I would send them, I would make photographs of people on negative, turn them into paper, send them to a magazine or newspaper, and then they'd publish them. But no one ever paid me to take photographs. You didn't pay me if you saw this or the other magazines. You bought the mode of distribution, you bought the magazine. And so the internet got rid of, the cost of making, the cost of paper and the cost of shipping. And then digital mobile devices took care of the second. Supply was now abundant and free. And I think in lots of ways this is analogous to the situation we find ourselves in as teachers. Does anybody know what this is? If you want to tweet, please tweet. I can pull it up on my phone at some point. If you hashtag anything phone or I will stop. This is a live Flickr feed. This is people uploading things live to Flickr, or it was when I recorded it. But this is slowed down over 100 times so that you can actually see it. So imagery is abundant, and I came to realise, the key thing for me was I came to realise that images had very different properties to photographs. Primary among them is that the photographs are fixed in the physical world. They age. Whereas images reach out and connect people. They're kind of unhitched from time and space. So I had to kind of work out what my product was. I mean, when you look at a picture like this, where everybody's got a mobile phone, everybody's a witness, everybody's connected, everyone's publishing and supplying. What's my job here? What is it that I do that's so special? So at this time I was wrestling with the internet, with my images. I was seeing more of my images online than I'd ever seen before. I was taking pictures of famous people and they were just seemingly everywhere. And yet I was not earning any money whatsoever. And so I sort of decided to tackle this head on. I went down hunting people down who were using my images of famous people. And I would send them letters, or take down letters, telling them to take the images down. I'd accuse them of stealing my work, I'd say things like, would you steal the toys from my kids? Would you steal the dinner from our table? My car, perhaps? Why would you steal my photographs? I just hadn't connected at that point. I hadn't worked it out. I thought my product as a photographer, it had been photographs. I thought it was images, and it wasn't. And it took me a while to actually clock this. I mean, this is a retrospective narrative, really. I fumbled my way through all this. There was one moment where I sent a letter out to someone who had stolen my pictures of Heath Ledger, and poor fellow had died. The pictures were all over the place. They were of maximum value, but I couldn't stop the supply. Couldn't make them scarce again. Couldn't put them back in the bottle. So I hit this blogger with everything I'd got, and I got this weekly email back from a 14-year-old girl in Middle America who was utterly devastated. Terrified that her parents were going to lose everything because she'd taken put my pictures on her blog. Sort of business suicide at this point, but we'd sort of passed that moment, really. And a weird thing happened. I started to see traffic on my blog, more traffic than I'd ever seen from before. It see, it turns out that she wasn't just any Heath Ledger sort of fan, she was the definitive Heath Ledger fan. She was the trusted source, the credible Heath Ledger fan that everybody goes to find out where the best stuff on Heath Ledger is. And she just endorsed me and sent everybody to me. Now, at the time, I didn't have a way of monetizing this. I had nothing on my blog, nothing on my website. I didn't have a blog then. Nothing on my website. I was a photographer. I was a very successful photographer. I had a studio in New York, I had one in London, and things carried on. But when I came to the access I open source the problem. I asked what should I be teaching and how should I be teaching it. I had 9 people in the room. It was the first year the course had opened. It was a brand new course. Anyone that applied had been come to the class. And after 30 weeks, after 3 iterations, 35,000 people came to the class. Now, there was a kind of a mixed response from the university on the institution at this point. You know, a year in, and one server later, I had to explain what I was doing, what I'd done. And there was a kind of mixed situation. I guess a lot of us are going to find ourselves in this situation. Someone's going to be really keen on what you're doing, and someone's going to be very terrified by what you're doing. So luckily, my VC was really exciting. visualization. It will crash, so you'll have to go directly to Martin's site. But you can pull apart these nodes. And showing the students this is super, super valuable because they can find out where their conversations are leading them, not just within the network, but they can see within the rest of the world. Martin's picked out information in here so that we can see what the conversation was this person is responding to. If you pull them out, do they pop out of this sphere? Or do they pull the entire network with them? Are they a really key part of your conversation? So this is a really super valuable tool for the student. For the manager, let's say, for the institution, I'm able to point out and say, look, this is the network that we wanted. This was the connections. This is the internationalization. This is the touch point for all of these people that are not in the room, that can't afford to be there for whatever reason. When I thought about what the product was as a teacher, it's definitely not the information. My class had to be more than was available on YouTube. The product for my class is that mentor learning experience. It's the fun moments, the fun stuff that we do in the classroom. And by opening it out online, we made that into like an outward-facing asset. Made it into a touch point, the thing that people come to. There are more people that come to my class and then see Coventry University than go to Coventry University, than have gone to Coventry University for the last 3 years. And that didn't cost anything at all. So the next project I'm going to talk about is something, we just saw that class there, and we saw there was a big class around the outside of it. Now a lot of those people will never ever get to go to Coventry. Geography stops them, finance stops them. They're just not able to deal with it academically, perhaps. But what about if you take the class and you go out into that cloud? The reason for putting the class in places like Flickr and Vimeo and YouTube and all those other spaces is to go where the fish are already swimming. Why would we want to rebuild Facebook or Twitter or YouTube when they are really good at being Facebook, Twitter and YouTube? So we just go out there, it saves an awful lot of money as well. And we aggregate everything back to the class by using hashtags. If any of this is not clear, then I'm happy to answer those questions by email. So the class becomes the hub. The class becomes the hub, just like that Heath Ledger girl was a hub. The place where everybody goes to find all this information out. Now what about if we take that hub, we move out, we go out into that cloud? What about if we write a class which is aimed at all the people who can't get to go to university? What about if we write it for a 12 to 18-year-old set of kids who are perhaps at risk? What about if they haven't got cameras? But most kids have a phone, and very often they have access to a smartphone. What about if the teacher doesn't have a classroom? Or what about if she doesn't have a computer, but she has a phone like the kids have a phone? What about if we write it all for that? So that's what we did and wrote. So this launches on June the 18th. It's called Phonar Nation, and was made possible with, same as Phonar, a lot of working at night and weekends, but this time had some support from the MacArthur Foundation and MIT, UC Irvine in California. So you can go to phonarnation.org and you can see this class, and this summer, you can take it, anyone can take it. 250,000 kids between 13 and 18 are going to be getting an email to ask them if they want to do this class this summer. At-risk kids in 7 cities across America. Already we've got iterations springing up in Bangladesh, in India, in France, and 2 in Ireland, 1 here in Scotland, I'm delighted to say, and elsewhere. And every person that comes along, even if it's just a pair of eyeballs, brings something else to the network. It's a non-diminishing resource. More people that come, they don't take anything away, they just bring stuff. They increase the network every single time. But then, this is the third project. This is the third project. So the class, rethinking what the asset is, turning it into an outward-facing asset. What happens when you do that? What happens when you unhitch it from the institution, you go before the institution, you use the alumni to mentor the kids that haven't gone yet? You create this virtuous circle. But what happens when you unhitch it completely and you go into industry and you take this model is visual learning, it ends in action, it brings people together that are otherwise They're only connected by the internet, but it brings them together, and as I say, it ends in action. What happens when you do that? So this project was, we've been working on this since the end of last year. And it's with the World Press Photo Award. For those people who don't know what that is, it's like the Pulitzer for photography. Everyone knows the Pulitzer Prize in journalism. And it's a prize. These are some of the winning entries. You know, we should be familiar with these pictures if we're not familiar with the institution. So what happens when you pair with an institution like this? This is this year's winning entry. Do you know, who knows what this image is? What do people think this image is? It would be awesome at this point if you would tweet what you think this image is and hashtag it #ScotPhoto. But if anybody wants to pipe up and be brave, because we are in an analog situation, you can just say. Yes? I bet there's going to be a lot of people who are going to say that. Yeah. Yeah, you think so.
Getting a better signal from a neighbouring country.
Exactly. Exactly that. He's nailed it. They're not taking selfies. No, what is your name? Excuse me, sorry, the better signal person.
Walter Patterson.
Walter. So the title for this is Signal by John Stanmeyer. African migrants on the shore of Djibouti city at night, raising their phones in an attempt to capture an inexpensive signal from neighbouring Somalia. A tenuous link to relatives abroad, Djibouti is a common stop-off point for migrants in transit from countries such as Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, seeking a better life in Europe and the Middle East. You know, yeah, they are trying to get a better signal probably because they're about to jump on a boat. But my point here, I think this is sort of really quite telling. My point here is, why does it take John Stanmeyer to go and do this? Why does it take an American, any journalist, any photographer to go and do this? They're all connected, they all have mobile phones. Why are they not making this picture? These are the people that most need to tell this story. Right? You don't need to win a competition with this. So what happens when you turn this competition into an education platform? The World Press has had an academy since the 90s, since the fall of the Iron Curtain. But they've always run it like a competition. Each year, people from all over the world would apply to get to go to school. And each year, 9 people would win, or 10. So I said to them, you know, what's the purpose of the academy then? And they said, well, it's to put something back. You know, it's to put something back. It's to sort of raise that citizen journalism level. I said, what? 10 people at a time? Why don't you just flip this open? Why don't you make this open and make it available for everyone? And they did, and it's cost them nothing. And now we're reaching. We did it via Facebook. We had some big challenges. This course was going to run in North Africa. How do you build trust online with online audiences when your audience only is used to assuming trust face to face, which is largely Arab nations. So we had some challenges, and we did a little bit of research, and we found something. Well, who knew? We tried to experiment with this thing called transitive trust, trust by proxy. Trust by association. Who knew that street artists were super influential in Egypt? Who knew that poets in Tunisia? We pulled them into the project, and the project hits 11 million people now. 11 million people over 12 months. And now with 11 million people, you can really do something. You can really do something quite exciting, I think. This is where the exhibition sort of travels to over the 12-month period, and this is where World Press already has a presence, right? This is where they have a presence. What they didn't know, and I only just got this. Now this is not definitive, and I'm sorry that it's difficult to read. This is what they didn't know: is that who knew that we would get 308 people work in Algiers or in Benghazi. Perhaps you can read it better than I can from further away. Tripoli. How many people here teach in Tripoli? Who has an open class and teaches in Tripoli? It's difficult. It'd be difficult with the language, wouldn't it? But the great thing about visual learning is that, and speaking with pictures, is that you can sometimes move beyond that. So this is the third project that I wanted to share. And this is the piece that I showed you at the beginning. So the reason why I think this is the most exciting thing that's come out of any of the work that I've done. This is someone who did my class, did phono, photography and narrative. But this is someone who is 16, a girl called Priyanka, who is 16 and wants to go to university one day. And she did this with a mobile phone and a torch. Thank you. I've seen this big before, and I was absolutely astounded. And just the way you're engaging with the learners, it's just absolutely wonderful. It really is. It's superb. Now we've got a slight change of programme next. And the National faculty is laid up, so I would like to welcome Sheila McNeil up to have a chat about exploring the digital university. I'm sure there'll be lots of MOOC references this year. No MOOC references?
No, I'm absolutely terrified now because not only am I a substitute, I've just had to follow Jonathan's fantastic presentation. So excuse all my visuals and the whole presentation. I'll just get my slides up. So this is not quite as planned, but hopefully. I think there's some resonance with what I'm going to talk about today and what the other speakers have been doing. If I can just get this to go full screen. And where is it? In the top or at the bottom? Oh, there's the bottom. Okay, so yeah, as Joe said, I'm Sheila McNeil. I work at Glasgow Caledonian University. And today I'm going to talk a bit about some work I've been doing with a colleague of mine, Bill Johnson, when we started thinking about the whole notion of a digital university a couple of years ago when we were both working at Strathclyde. So I think actually from the presentations this morning, particularly the one about Digital Scotland, I think there's maybe quite a lot of resonance. And it's quite interesting that Jonathan was talking about product and rethinking his product. I don't know about you and your institutions, but we're talking quite a lot about product and platforms just now. And I really want to talk about people and process, because I think that's what's really important, and we need to focus on them quite a lot as well. So I'll just take you through some of the things that we've been doing. This quote is from a report that I'm sure that and I don't know what it is, but it's kind of like, remember about 10 years ago when we were all talking about e-learning and everything had an E in the front of it, and that made it fantastic. Just put an E in front of it, you get some funding. And then when Apple came out with the iPhone, everything had an I in front of it for a while. And it seems to me that somehow a lot of things we're seeing now have a digital in front of them, and if you put digital in front of something, if something's digitally enabled, then just somehow magically it's going to be so much better than something that's not digitally enabled or not mentioned, that doesn't mention the word. So here, and it's not just in education, I think there's kind of it's in wider society, and I think this is very telling in this quote because it's talking about this digital revolution. Now, I think not just in education, but elsewhere. Now this other quote, it came from a Nesta report, which is just before the Avalanche is coming, was published just before the Avalanche is coming report. It's a very good report. If you haven't read it, I thoroughly recommend it to you. But again, they're talking about digital technologies. And they're saying, yes, they've had an impact, but actually the impact of the digital technologies themselves, we've still really to have some real evidence about that. Technology, the people are making impact, but we're still not very sure about this. So this kind of notion of a digital revolution, we still kind of need to do an awful lot more research about that to actually prove that something has actually changed from digital technologies themselves. Now, I was going to show you a video, but after seeing Jonathan's presentation, I'm not going to bother because it was something that I made and it's a bit rubbish, so we'll just skip through that. We've got time at the end, am I? So what is a digital university? Well, Bill, my colleague, and I had Bill went to a presentation where he was told that he was now working in a digital university because they had a digital repository. Now that's a very important part of a university, but I don't think that alone makes a university a digital university. So we thought, well, it has to be something wider, it's much more holistic. So we had a bit of a think about it, and we felt that these kind of 4 themes and concepts were quite key to this whole notion, and actually to be able to have a discussion to actually understand what it is, because I still don't really know what a digital university is, and I think it means lots of different things to lots of different people in different contexts. So we thought digital participation, which we've heard a lot about today, is very key, and I think I'll go through these in a bit more detail as well. We thought that's key. Information literacy. Now, we're kind of coming from quite, if you like, an old school standpoint, but we see digital literacy as a subset of information literacy, but there's definitely something right about that. Learning environments are obviously crucial to these conversations, and curriculum and course design. So that's what we thought, and they're all interlinked. And you can start with any one, but you can't really look at them in isolation. They all impact on each other. So what we did was we kind of explored these concepts a bit more, and we came up with this little matrix. So these are some of the things that we thought would be really useful to start some conversations within any kind of educational context. A global market, you know, we're all doing this global thing. Globalization is a really key thing for us. But at the same time, we want to keep our own local identity. So, you know, we're here in the University of Edinburgh, which has a very strong local identity, but it's a global university. So there's kind of this localization thing. There's the whole widening access agenda, which again we've talked about today. The whole notion of the civic role and responsibility of a university, I think that can be changed quite profoundly through digital technologies, because we have a whole different set of technologies and different ways to engage with the wider community. And I don't think we've really explored that a lot, but I think there's something that we could actually almost reinvigorate the civic, you know, our thinking around civic responsibilities for institutions. We just think about networks, human and digital ones, and also just the whole kind of technological affordances that we have now that allows us to participate. In terms of information literacy, and you can put digital literacy in that box as well. So we really need to get people to be thinking about these kind of high-level concepts and perceptions and how that influences practice. And I think developing visual literacies, as we heard about earlier, and a whole you know, the whole raft of digital skills and information literacy skills that we need to think about. And we need to get staff and students engaged with them, so that, again, does kind of impact on curriculum and course design. And the reason we really need to have effective information and digital literacy skills is so if we are spending lots of money on new digital infrastructure, that we actually have people who know what to do with it and actually can make the best use out of it as possible. We move into learning environments. If we're thinking about learning environment, we don't just think about our virtual learning environments. It's the physical space as well as the digital. And things are, we're seeing much more of a blend of things just now, but we can't just think that in the digital world that it's all going to happen online. But the learning environment is much more about you know, people and how you interact and how we actually get people and our students to have those kind of metacognitive skills where they can see themselves as a learning environment, so they know actually know how to interact with networks, both physical and digital, and they can make the kind of connections that they need to be global citizens and to participate in this new digital world that we're living in. There's obviously a key part for research and inquiry, because that's core to most universities' business as well. And this impacts again on staff and resources. we move through to curriculum and course design. A lot of people who really want to are thinking about constructive alignment and have been for many, many years, but how do we make sure that we are aligning our course, our curriculum and our courses with the needs of our society and the jobs that we want our students to hopefully get? How is digital technology enabling us to look at curriculum representations in terms of our course designs, in terms of pedagogic innovation? There's a lot of work, and I've been involved in a lot of that work as well around learning design, how we can share patterns, how does that affect us? There is certainly something that digital can enable us to do there as well. In terms of our courses and our curriculum, well, that's actually what sells our universities in some ways. We think about things like KISS, which is actually giving more information to our students about what we actually do. When we're opening up more of our courses, marketing has quite a big impact on certain large online courses as well. And then we've got a whole new level of reporting, data and analytics that are coming through. So all these things we felt were important and might help people have a conversation about what it meant for them to be a digital university. So we didn't just talk about this, we did write some blog posts where we kind of explained each of these quadrants in a bit more detail, and they were quite popular. We got quite a lot of interest in them, got a couple of papers published. But then it was actually when Keith Smythe, who's at the University of Napier here in Edinburgh, he got in touch because they were actually coincidentally at the time thinking about their own digital future. And I think we have some colleagues from Napier in here today as well. So they asked if we would like to be involved in some of this work as critical friends. So we said, yeah, we'd be delighted. So what they wanted to do was really find out what was happening in the university and how they could work together more collaboratively to make some better strategic decisions about their digital future, if you like. So in September 2012, they started looking at that. They were looking at some of our blog posts. And then in December of that year, they had a symposium for people that was representative across the university, where they are including students. And they kind of introduced the notions, and they had identified 6 key areas that they were particularly keen on working in. And they formed a working group that had representation from all the faculties, from all the service departments and from students as well, to really think, explore and get a really good baseline of what was actually happening within the institution. And Bill and I acted as critical friends for that project. Now these are the 6 areas that they looked at: developing digital literacies, student support provision, digitally enhanced education, communication and outreach, research and leadership, and infrastructure and integration. And I think probably if people were doing these are kind of high-level things that most people are interested in anyway. So they spent over a year really having quite a wide-ranging consultation exercise, which had lots and lots of benefits for people that were involved. It brought a lot of people together who hadn't spoken to each other, or maybe just didn't have the time to speak together. People found out things that they didn't know that other people were doing, so there's lots of, as you do at any point when you bring people together. So initially they've got a very rich picture of practice that's happening in Napier. Napier is quite interesting in itself because it has 3 campuses, so it has kind of that distributed organisation issue as well, that maybe some other institutions don't have, even though they're all based in Edinburgh, and people don't always meet people from the other campuses. So what they've done, they've come up with some short-term recommendations and a visioning document of future work. Now, as far as I know, I spoke to Keith last week, some of these recommendations, hopefully they will be made public in the next couple of weeks. It's not really for me to share what these are just now, but a couple of things that have come through just from the work that were quite interesting was around staff development and digital literacies. And one of the things that came through was particularly from administrative staff. They tend to get forgotten in some of these conversations about digital literacies, because it's always about the staff and the students, and people forget the administrators and the programme administrators and various people who actually maybe really want to get involved, particularly in things like social media in a professional context, but they don't really know how to or what's appropriate. And in Napier there was no sort of central training unit to help them do that. And I think that's actually probably not uncommon in lots of universities as well. So I thought that was really interesting that actually this work gave them a voice, and that's something that they're taking forward. They've also produced a really useful benchmarking document around other work that was happening in the sector. Now that was based a lot on openly available resources and reports that people had shared, so I think that will be made available as well. So there's a lot of outputs coming out from that, so that's been quite, well, it's been really interesting being part of that process. Now, I started work at GCU last October, and case study two is based on some of the work I've been doing with Linda and our colleague Jim in terms of looking at our vision and our notion of what our digital future at Glasgow Caledonian might be. So I'm based in the Department of the Learning Enhancement and Academic Development Unit, Staff Development Unit. So one of the first documents that I looked at when I started was the Strategy for Learning, the new Strategy for Learning. You see we have 10 design principles and we have a number of enablers. Now when I looked at this at first I thought actually that kind of fits in quite well with our matrix, because you know, we have digital and I think digital learning and technology, there's broader and deeper learning, global learning. I was thinking, well, maybe there's something we could help in terms of, you know, the implementation of this strategy and looking at the digital university. But obviously there's a lot more strategies and a lot of things happening in the university, so as Linda quite rightly guided me, we needed to look at sort of the broader context of what was happening in GCU. And you don't really need to understand everything that's happening here. Excuse me while I just blow my nose. But one of the things, like many people that we're working on just now, there's a number of different things happening in the university. So we're developing a new strategy for 2020. We have a very large-scale building works that I think we're going to start next month or in August, and £24 million new campus extension, big part. We have the strategy for learning, we have a strategy for research, and we also have our current mission and key performance indicators. So what we did was we had a look at some of these documents to see if we could map these onto the quadrants in our matrix. And unsurprisingly, we could. One of the things that GCU has quite I suppose one of its, you know, its mission really is around about the common weal, the common good. So participation in all aspects is really, really critical for us. So although we've got, you know, quite big global ambitions, we have a very, you know, big ambitions locally as well. So participation is really important for us. So we have all these things. And we have, in particular in our developing strategy, there's things, there's lots of very complicated diagrams with all these things going on. And digital participation is mentioned, but it's sort of like a separate node. And I think with a lot of these strategies, there's an underlying assumption that something digital is going to enable all this to happen. But it's sort of, the digital's kind of seen over here. And we were seeing this, that actually the digital should be seen as an enabler, and it should be something that's connecting all these strategies together. So what we did was, last month we had a consultation day where we brought together people from across the institution, from our schools and from our service departments, and we had student representation. Not so much as we'd like, but we will do some more with that. And we wanted to get people to think about their, you know, move from the individual to the institutional notions of, you know, what their experience of digital participation and what a digital university might want to be. So we got them to look at what they were doing just now, think about short-term and longer-term ambitions and realities. I don't know if, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the work that Dave White's been doing around visitors and residents. People, a few nods? Yeah. So I, along with a colleague, Evelyn McElvenny, and David has been doing some work with the Higher Education Academy. They have a programme called Online Literacies in the Disciplines. And we've got one of their projects that's looking at students' online I suppose that their interactions, and he has a mapping methodology, and I'll explain this to you. So basically it's quite simple, it's really good for students because it's a quick way to actually start having a conversation with students about where they are online and when they're online. So the idea is like, this is visitor and resident, institutional, professional and personal. And if you're a visitor, and this is kind of moving on from the sort of the immigrants and native thing with Pensky, but what David says is, actually sometimes when you're online, you're in a visitor mode, so you'll just dip in and out of something and you don't leave a social trace. And sometimes you're more resident, and there's quite a lot of people in this room that are showing very digital resident behaviour today because they're tweeting, they're listening, they're doing all sorts of things, they're streaming or whatever. So you're very comfortable in an online space, and that really doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter if you were born after 1994, you can still be very resident. So this is just, to show you a couple of samples, this is what we did for one of our icebreaker activities on our consultation day. We got our staff to do that. So this, I think this is quite fascinating. That's LinkedIn, in case you can't read what that is. This is a very resident individual. They don't muck about, they're not visiting anything. They're online and they're resident. And GCU Learn is our VLE, so they're on GCU Learn, they're doing their email, they're using all kinds of different tools. They're researching, they do a bit of shopping, and they're online and they're emailing in their personal life as well, but all very, very resident behaviour. This is somebody else who, obviously the centre of their life, like many of us, is Google, and that kind of crosses everything, but they're kind of slightly a bit more, a bit more varied. So they have a bit of visitor behaviour, personal, they do a bit of shopping, going to the app stores, listening to some music. They're very online, things like resident, Twitter, professional networks. Interestingly for them, and I'm not sure where they're from, whether this is an academic or maybe it's a GCU learning environment, is a bit more in the visitors, kind of on the cusp. They're obviously doing a bit more in the repositories, doing a bit in Google Drive. So actually, if you haven't done this exercise before, there's a video, and it's actually on my blog. There's links to all the work we've done with our students as well on my blog. It's a very, very interesting exercise to do because there's so many things. I mean, I've done it about 3 times now. I forget where I have a social trace online. I'd actually forgotten that I have an About Me profile till I did this. And I went back onto my About Me page, and I was astounded to see how many hits I'd had on that page. Something I just completely forgotten about, but it leaves a social trace, and if people are looking for me, that comes up quite highly on this page. It's interesting, and I think what it does, it makes you think about where you are online, and I think at a personal level that's really useful, but at an institutional level, it's giving us an insight more in terms of our students about what spaces they're in and why they're in there. And they tend to be quite visitor in our, and this is a sweeping generalisation, we've not done an awful lot of mapping with it, anywhere near the number of students we need to do. But they're quite visitor in terms of going into these spaces, they dip in and out, and that's maybe all right. But if they are using online spaces, then we need to know that. And I think as Jonathan said there, why are we trying to recreate Facebook and Twitter when they're already there? We just need to make sure that we're bringing people back into our spaces when it's appropriate. Because if we all move into Facebook, then they'll just all move out somewhere else. So that's what we did. And we also asked people to fill in the matrix. This is just a quick wordle of some of the things, the responses about things that people were doing just now in terms of online collaborative cross-university projects. So there's a few things, there's library information, there's a few things in there. This is the wordle of what they would like in 2010. So I think it's quite telling that people come out at the top, very prominent there. We've got a bit about the audits coming out here. We've got some sterling work being done in our library just now with Marion and colleagues with our digital literacy and information literacy resources with Smile and Smirk, and we now have an OER policy for the institution. There's quite a few things coming there, but it all really, I think, focuses around about people, and for some reason, I don't know if you can see, there was somewhere online payslips seem to be like an aspiration, not really quite sure, but anyway, that's so we're actually still trying to make sense of all the feedback that we've had and take this forward. But some emerging themes I'll just go through. So certainly some things coming through. Not that different really from the 6 from Napier. Obviously our infrastructure, digital and physical, is really key because we have got this new building work happening. We really need to think about it. We have quite a few new systems being implemented in the university, and we really need to think about how we're doing that so we make the best use of what we've got. Again, I think this kind of links back to the mapping work. So in terms of, you know, what kind of new technologies that we're buying, that we need to be more connected and be sharing what we're doing. So, you know, we really don't need to really have more online collaborative social spaces for students because they can find that and they're quite happy in their own spaces. We possibly need to be thinking more about what we want the students to be doing, what we as a university can offer them. Digital literacy development for staff and students is a big issue for us as well because we don't have a central IT training unit anymore, so that is a gap that we need to start looking at. Some simple things that we think we can start doing in terms of bringing people together. We've been quite influenced by the work that's been done at the University of Southampton in their Digital Champions project, so simple things like maybe having some coffee clubs, looking at that sort of thing with staff, really looking at that. The other thing we probably need to do, and we've been thinking about this anyway, is although we have our strategy for learning, we probably need to have a bit more of a think and create some more implementation plans, if you like, around technology. For example, we don't have a mobile strategy, and in some ways it's a bit late because we know from our latest figures that, you know, the accesses to our VLE have risen exponentially from mobile devices. So students are using their mobile devices, that's how they're coming in. What we maybe need to have is a switch on policy so that, you know, when you're in class it's fine, we need to encourage people to be using devices. But we need to think about our staff because not all our staff have tablets or smart devices, and if we really want to use the power of mobile technology, maybe what we should be thinking about is actually giving our staff iPads, and that might have a bigger influence and change our notion of what a digital university is for some of our staff, and actually might make people engage a bit more with technology enhanced learning. E-assessment is a big thing for many people. We've seen in the past year that, again, we've had tremendous growth in people using e-assessment, but things do go wrong. A well-known system has had a few problems over the past few months, which obviously can be very stressful for people, but we need to have the same diligence, and we need to have an equitable set of guidelines for staff and students around those kind of failures that happen, as we do have for paper submissions, because we have that, but we don't have, you know, that for our online submissions, and we need to think about that. Big thing for us, like everybody, is data and learning analytics, and I think this could be what distinguishes a digital university, is how we all use our data and how we're more intelligent about how we're using our data. We have a lot of data just kind of hanging around in IS somewhere, that actually tells us what happens in our institution every day. We know how many people are logging onto our computers, we know where they're going, we know when they're using our Wi-Fi networks. We can actually, in my head I have a vision of a map of the campus and, you know, sort of a timeline with instead of people going in and out, but the online activity that they're having. So we can actually see that. And what I see, and when I was talking about place there, although we're doing more and more things online, a key thing for a university is its sense of place, and a university is a hub, and I think we can be a digital hub as well. So I think it's great if we can get students to keep coming into our university to use our Wi-Fi network and not go to Starbucks, then that's great. And they come into our university because we're a hub and they want to be there, they want to learn. So if they're on Facebook, so what? If we know that they're passing everything that they need to do and we're able to do different things for them, that's fine. If we know that they're there, that's fine. I think that strengthens us and gives us more information and helps us make more informed decisions. So I think that's really important. We're just touching on that. We're doing, the last couple of months, we've been doing quite a lot of work with our IS department in terms of trying to get access to our data. And we do have problems like everybody else. There are, you know, it's difficult to share some of our data, even within departments, never mind with anybody else. Obviously, open education is something we're committed to as well. As I mentioned, Marion and colleagues in the library are leading the way in this. But we need to develop that culture of openness. For Open Education Week this year, Brian Kelly asked me to write a blog post about open education. And I wrote a blog post actually based on what Cable Green said at the first Open Scotland meeting, when he said the opposite of open isn't opposite of open isn't closed, it's broken. And it's a really strong statement. But what I've been reflecting on, going back into an institution, is that I've had the luxury of being able to develop as an open practitioner. And every day, academics and support staff, they don't always have that luxury. I've been encouraged to blog. It's part of my job to network, to be on social networks, to tweet, to try something new. I had a lot of confidence, I was backed up to be able to do that. For a lot of people in institutions, they just don't have that. So it's not that they're not interested in open education, it's just not on their radar. They just don't know. And it's not because they're not intelligent, it's not because they're not networking, it's just not practice for them. So we do need to, there's a huge amount of support and I suppose just encouraging good practice. Just saying to people, when you do a PowerPoint presentation, put it onto SlideShare, put a Creative Commons license on it, share things, try things and give people the confidence to do that, and that's really important. And I think for us, like everybody, what we need to do is make sure that everything that we're doing really coheres around student engagement and the student experience, because basically that's what we're all in education for anyway. So that's our digital university. That's my contact detail. Just want to thank Keith and Bill, because I've reused a few of their slides. That's a link to my blog that will give you a bit more information on the work that we've been doing. And if anyone is interested in having any discussions about this, we'd love to speak to you. And that's me. Thank you very much.
How was that for a keynote requested about yesterday? Absolutely superb. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Now we're on to a bit that actually a lot of us don't know about, because it sits within in schools. And I've got Ian Stewart and John Johnson going to come up and tell us a bit about what GLOW is and what it does.
Good afternoon. I know it's the graveyard shift, and we got a wee bit of a surprise when we arrived today. We were told we would have 15 minutes to go through GLOW, and we looked at the programme and it said half an hour. So that woke us up this morning. That was nice and bright, strong coffee, and that was a little bit of an incentive. So, sorry, I will slow right down. I'm from Glasgow, I'm from Govan. I need to slow down and fill things in. Now, earlier on, my boss, who I've never met before, by the way, don't record that, said that civil servants can't tell jokes. Good news and bad news again. I'm not a civil servant and my jokes are rotten, though. That's the really bad news. My name is Ian Stewart. I was deputy head teacher in Isla High School. I highly recommend the whisky. It's fantastic, and I'm selling the brand, definitely. The school was 200 metres from Bowmore Distillery. If you look at the back of a bottle of Bowmore, it says School Street, and we're next door. I just left, just before we finished digging that tunnel, just to reach that final wee part. John Correll's sitting over there, he's been over. Joe's been over, gave her awards out a few years ago. The context of Isla is that the high school covers Isla and Dure. We had 250 pupils at the time, covering a large geographical area, small number of teachers, difficult to present our courses to at times, lack of teachers, course specifies. Prime example was we advertised 6 times for a computing teacher and failed to get any applicants. Don't know why. I thought it was beautiful myself, but don't know why. So we decided to flip that. This was 10 years ago. We decided to flip our learning, where we took the computing and dispersed it amongst the core subjects. Not just the core subjects, all the subjects. So for example, Excel spreadsheets being taught across the curriculum, through science, through business education, through PE, through whatever it was, video and creativity being taught, not just through art, but also through English and all those kind of sorts of things. So we split it out. I myself am a technology teacher. We use video a lot, even in things like woodworking, where we get the kids to record exactly what we're doing. Also meant that sometimes our pupils didn't necessarily have to come into school. If they were living on Dura, if the ferry went off, they stayed at home. So every pupil had their own tablet PC, every teacher had their own tablet PC, wireless projectors right throughout the school. Those were not the important things. The curriculum was the important things. I was a major critic of GLOW. I didn't use it. We didn't use it. We didn't have a context to use it. I was then brought into the ICT Excellence Group, which we'll be talking about a bit more in a minute, and said, so, what would you do? And we'll come back to that.
So I'm John Johnson, mostly a primary school teacher in Glasgow. The school I taught in was Sandgate Primary, which quite often is confused with a Highland location of great beauty, but ends up being in the East End of Glasgow, which had some beauty of its own. We didn't have one-to-one tablets. I usually had 2 PCs in the back of the classroom, so we did none of the sort of vast transformative work that Ian's done. What I did do very early on was start my 10-year-olds working online, blogging and podcasting in the main. And I think that's kind of probably relevant today because it was open. I didn't know it was open education. I just thought I'm giving the kids a big audience and connecting them with other kids learning in other parts of the world. But I don't think anybody said the word open education in the 2004s and about then. And we just sort of used the technology and the children had fun with it. After that, I never used GLOW either because it hadn't arrived at that point. I did do a wee bit of beta testing with the early GLOW. And about 5 years ago, I left the classroom and went to North Lanarkshire to support ICT and staff development. And there I have been involved in GLOW because I arrived in North Lanarkshire just as they were rolling out what is now old GLOW. So I've had a deal of experience in teaching people about it and sort of parachuting into classes and using it rather than using it day to day. I don't know how many people have heard of GLOW or know about it, so I'm just going to pretend that nobody knows anything about it because that makes it easier for me. And if you look up in the Wikipedia, which is the thing I go to usually for things, it was started out as a national intranet. And I think that was just amazingly ambitious when it was thought of, and I don't know the exact date it was thought of. It got off the ground in 2007. John, when was it thought of? When was it first a spark in your imagination? 2001. 2001. In 2001. I mean, I just think that's mind-blowing. In 2001, people were thinking we can have a national intranet. And that's just the first thing about GLOW. Just amazing. At the moment, this is what it says on Education Scotland's website about GLOW. So I've jumped by a few years from 2001. That this is what it's about now. It was an intranet. Now it's going to be something that supports learning. Unlocking the benefit of the internet. So it's not intranet anymore, or it hopes not to be intranet anymore so much as internet. But still, this nationwide, and again, I think it's quite ambitious and it's quite a good idea. So when it actually kicked off in 2007, that's when people got their first hands on it. It was based around SharePoint 2003, which was a closed system, but it gave people the tools to communicate, collaborate, share documents, have discussion forums, and it gave children the ability to do that. They could go in, once they've got their login, they could explore places, they could get resources, and a whole raft of other online resources, which to me, are resources that it's a space for collaboration and communication. I think that was really interesting about Glow, and people used it as that. At the same sort of time, though, sort of Web 2.0 had arrived, and that there was some sort of latterly in Glow, the sort of the feeling that it felt a wee bit kind of clunky at that point and slightly out of date, which I think was both fair and unfair, because there was great work being done in Glow. There was a lot of good stuff, but there's a lot of people found the tools slightly off-putting. But under the sort of leadership of Andrew Brown, about 2010, we got wikis and forums and blogs, and this is when sort of Glow started to have the potential to open up, and I think that potential we're still sort of working on. And the great thing about the wikis and forums and blogs was that they could be private completely. So I could have a wiki that only I could see, or I could have a wiki that my class or just me and my pal could have. Or I could have a wiki for the whole of Glow, or in all of these services you could open it up so that they were public and anybody could see them. So we could, it's like you were given permission. Before, when I was creating blogs and stuff, it was like a wee bit guerrilla stuff. You know, your head teachers didn't really understand what you were doing, and the local authority didn't really know what a blog was, so you got away with it. But now we were basically given permission by the government, by the nation, that we could have our stuff out in the open. This version of Glow, the old Glow, with these things sort of added on, plus we had video conferencing in there, a few other bits and pieces that I can't actually remember at the moment, but a lot of different services went on until I think about 2010, 2011. At this point they were extending the contract with RM, who delivered the whole service, and there was an idea in the government that we needed to replace that with something else, and there was the usual sort of starting of procurement and things. And I think 2011, Mike Russell stood up on YouTube and talked about Glow, and he said, we're stopping what they called at that time Glow Future. We're stopping the procurement of that because the new Glow is going to be based on open source, best of breed software, which I think at that point got from people in schools who were excited about technology quite buoyed up. After that, and I had my history of knowledge gets a bit vague and hazy then because it got complicated. Things sort of stumbled along, but then, as Ian said, Mr. Russell decided to have this ICT and Excellence Committee who would map out the ideas for the new Glow. And when we saw the report, which came out in 2013, January 2013, it says it there, and there's a couple of interesting words in that one. Open and openly accessible for the analytics on the system. That the new service should be open as possible with only personal secure content behind this authentication barrier. And I think for a lot of people who had been looking at different systems developing around the world, that seemed really exciting. I thought it was this sort of excellent report, if you get the reference. So Ian was on this delivered, he was part of the thing that delivered this sort of delightful report to me. He's going to dig into it a wee bit more and talk about it.
So the ICT Excellence Group was a wide-ranging group. We had representatives from industry, schools. Initially we had nobody from primary school, we soon rectified that, brought people in. We had higher education as well represented. So it was fairly wide-ranging. I wouldn't say completely wide-ranging, but fairly wide-ranging. And it came out with 5 major conclusions. It should be user-focused. That's a nice, easy statement to make. How do you do that with assistance from 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds? You don't build on systems, the answer, but it's user-focused. I thought I took these timings off, John. So it should be any placing device, should be agnostic. Agile, responsive, evolving. The old Glow was stuck inside, didn't have an opportunity to grow and change. process was stopped by the Cabinet Secretary and put through. It should be able to change. It should use the best of breed. And the last thing, it should be an open system. Now again, we didn't define what any of these actually meant. That would be far too difficult. We deliberately didn't do that. But we did say we wanted it to be core services, to be identity management and storage. And actually the conversations about badges becomes really important with that storage, that ongoing perpetual place where you can keep stuff. There's conversations to be had, how perpetual is perpetual? How long do we keep it? But I think we have to make it easy to transfer out and match it to standards and to FE, industry and HE. And I think those become really important. The other core is the identity, who you are. Everything else hangs off that. It's not knitted in. That means that you have a first level open badges, you have layers feeding each other with other possibilities in there. Okay? These are not indicative of what's actually going to be in here. These are purely simple ideas of what could be in there. Okay? Not exclusive. With a little bit of integration. A little bit of information passing across. Not massive amounts. We want the learning analytics to be part of that. The second layer, integrated but not supported. No information passes, simply authenticating in. And again, any products mentioned here are purely indicative. Kids love Minecraft. And the third layer could be anything else. And we don't mean the Wild West, we mean anything else allowed by the local authority. One of the important things about this is that each of these can be interchanged, they can be moved. We can take WordPress, a new, brilliant, great WordPress or new blogging platform comes along. John will hate this idea. It comes along, and actually we have to take WordPress out and put a new one in. But keeping our content and our content management in central means that that's possible. And then that can be moved on to wherever it needs to move on to. There was conversations earlier about how you worked with employers, how you sent things out, and I think that becomes a really important aspect of it. The operating conditions to allow this to happen that were identified within the report were these. Again, nice and easy things to say, like guidance on the filtering policy, without making it the lowest common denominator for all 32 authorities, becomes a massive challenge. Herding cats has been mentioned several times. Fast broadband, here's an irony for you. I was on an island off the west coast of Scotland. Actually, we had an 80 megabyte connection to our school because 8 years ago there was a national Pathfinder project where the peripheries of Scotland got direct broadband connections to the Janet network. We actually had faster connections to 2,000 pupil schools in the centre of Glasgow. So the digital access rurally became much more important for us. We didn't use bring your own technology device, but it's something we have to acknowledge. We can't afford to pay to every pupil or every 3 years to get a new device. So that has to be part of the landscape, with a focus on education, understanding the concept of what they're doing, rather than trying to control that with technology, which I think is what happens at the moment.
So this report was given back to the government, and the position I think Ian and I are in, and we didn't maybe explain earlier on that our job title is Product Owner for Glow.
Can we test?
It sounds really good. Huh?
Who knows what a product owner is? 1, 2, 3. We found out from a YouTube video. It sounds scary. Well, a friend of mine said, you're not like acquiring hair product for the government, are you? Which I thought was a real irony in there somewhere. I think she was just being cheeky though. Product owner is the interface between education and technology, apparently. A product owner controls what the technologists try to produce. There are 4 of us. John's primary, I'm secondary. There are 2 others who are primary and secondary also. So that is our, we had, as I say, I literally had to look up on a YouTube video to understand what it was.
So I think this concept comes from the way that the government intends to do development through Scrum Agile development, which again, before we got the job, we had to study YouTube hard to find out what it was. And when we get there, we're not actually involved in Scrum Agile development. At the moment, what we're involved in is writing requirements for the new Glow service, which doesn't always feel agile. It's certainly thorough though. But we kind of are representing the schools in educators and learners in Victoria Quay, amongst the people who are developing this, who are not necessarily in education, but the expertise in getting things organised, doing things, developing things in the sort of digital directorate. So we've got the old Glow we're talking about, the contracts for this are all sort of winding up, and it goes away in October. So we're in a sort of funny position where we've got the old Glow, we've got the as-is Glow, and we've got the Glow Futures, which isn't called Futures anymore. But Glow now, what we've got at the moment and in the next short term is that all the content from the SharePoint stuff, because a lot of people put a lot of work into that, has been migrated to some extent to Microsoft 365 SharePoint in the cloud, which has been provided by Microsoft at no cost to the government. It also comes with a good set of collaborative tools. There's the online versions of Word and PowerPoint and all these sort of things. There's fantastic file storage, which keeps on changing as far as I can see. Every time I look, it gets bigger and you get more space through your email and stuff like that. So, and we've also got SharePoint. I don't know if anybody is familiar with SharePoint, used in lots of businesses and institutions. A place where you can collaborate together. I wouldn't say it's open. It's not. It's a closed system. And at the moment, we're very much exploring the sort of the elasticity of that, given that the people we work with are 5 or 6 or 7, or a lot of young kids, which we've got to deal with them in a different way. It may be possible that some of that will become open at some point. But we're also migrating other services. The video conferencing, which turned into sort of what they call Glow TV, is going to be migrated. The blogs are going to be migrated because the servers, at the end of the contract, will go away. We need to have a continuation of that, and one of the things I'm spending a lot of time on is doing that. And we're replacing other services, so we're not migrating them. Well, there's a Glow Wiki set up. We're just abandoning the stuff that's there and giving a new service. And at the moment, we're in this sort of, I was trying to think of a better word, sort of safety mode, because it basically is just to give people some sort of continuity. There's 130,000 blogs in the system, which is quite a few, and that'd be 130,000 potentially irritated people if we drop them. So the idea is, at this sort of safety mode, is to get those going. But they'll have the same sort of affordances. They'll be able to be private, they'll be able to be just select groups, go only, or they'll be able to be public. That's what's new, and I've put Glow Future at the top of that, but it's not. I mean, that's an unnamed project we've got going at the moment. We've got all these wee sort of projects running along, trying to migrate stuff and reorganise things, but we've got this unnamed project of what's going to happen in the future. And that's where I think, from the open point of view and the stuff flowing from the ICT and excellence, we've got this sort of room to manoeuvre. We've got a chance to make our case for open. And both Ian and myself, I think, have a history of maybe not knowing we are open educators, but being open educators. We're online, we're talking to people in different parts of the world about education. We tend to share things when we've got them, whether sometimes, in my case, if people want them or not. They just get them, I post it in a blog. So that's sort of our ethos from that. This presentation isn't in Glow. I guess it will be shared on Luana's blog. Because the thing is, at the moment, Glow isn't open enough to share. But it's where we're aiming for. And to do that, we've got some sort of interesting problems to do with the fact that we work with young people. And I know most people in the room work with young people, and I was kind of really schooling myself today not to say GLOW is for education, because it's really for schools. And there's an ambition to move into colleges and things like that, but I tend to think of education as starting at 3 and polishing up at 18 when we go to do something else, which it's not, it's schools. But we've got to think about very carefully when we're working with young children with data protection about child protection. If we're releasing children into the wild online, that's maybe not a great idea. And the last talk was looking at the sort of ecosystem of places people use their learning. And I know my online learning is shared across a few Tumblrs, a couple of blogs, Flickr, YouTube, and it's mixed in with other stuff that is personal and all the rest of it. And I'm kind of okay with that because I'm pretty old. But I don't think we can just release the weans and send them out right into that world. We've got to give them some sort of protection and take them in safely. We've also got this idea, and I think that came over quite clearly from other people speaking today, that the people we're trying to bring with us, the leaders in education, who still are the teachers, although we talk about learners a lot, we've got to encourage them to be open. And Scottish teachers in particular are maybe not always the most open. There's this idea that maybe if you stick your head up about the, oh, what's he like, you know, talk about that, what's he think he is, you know, there's a fear of being seen as that man or that woman. So we've got to kind of encourage this openness in lots of different ways. And it has been going on in GLOW a wee bit. It's got a huge distance to go. It maybe can start in nice, safe online communities and then just work out. I don't know.
I think the exemplification of opening and working together can happen in a safe environment and allow those cultural norms to develop in there. And I think that's the vision we're kind of aiming for, is allowing then pupils to move on with those skills, with those understanding of what it means to share, what it means to work collaboratively in a digital or online environment. Not necessarily to work only within Office 365 and Safe Tenancy, but also work with others around the world. Using that identity, using whatever you want to call it, whether it's a global login, a learner account, whatever you want to call it, allowing them to move forward. A couple of questions have come in. The answer about GLOW, where'd that come from? Gordon Cloud asked about GLOW. GLOW is a proof of concept. Is that? GLOW is a proof of concept, and if you're interested, have a look at it. And there was a question about the biggest barrier to GLOW in parts of Scotland, local authorities switching stuff off and not letting teachers share. Yes. Simple as that, yes. So, as John says, there's leaders who have to understand what the culture is. And there's a long way to go before that understanding is embedded.
I think what we're looking for from today is a sort of, hopefully some sort of engagement with the open people in Scotland to try and learn some lessons from you, to try and learn some lessons about how we can deal with these things. I think the technology is easy. It's a cultural bit. We need to get that sort of badge, you know, I am safe on the internet, or it's okay, here's your medal. We need help from other people who are maybe further down this road. And how do you get that into institutions? How does it work? I mean, I thought the discussion about open badges was really interesting in how culturally that moved by getting the right people involved. And you know, it astonished me that it was through sort of badging CPD, for instance, refusing to give out paper certificates. That's just a wee switch, and then that will maybe turn something else on. So we've got to kind of think about how we do this. The other thing I think in our ambition for GLOW is this idea, back to that thing, that there is things that need to be behind a password. But in the past, I think what happened was everything was behind that password. And it may be part of the GLOW ecosphere, sticks out, then you can access it. Somebody produces this lovely educational video, I can watch it. and it's in Go. I haven't had to log in, but it's maybe Badge Go or whatever. But there's a button there that links it into Go. If I want to add commentary as a learner in Scotland, that means I need to have an identity. And we're giving the children that identity, and you're giving them then a safe place. So it may be that you don't want them popping comments on a YouTube video, maybe not possible in your network, but it should be possible to go into Glow and have that conversation around the resource. There's no need for the resource necessarily to be behind there. It may be that some of those resources are procured and we've spent money on them and we're not allowed to do that. So then they're behind the login. But everything doesn't need to go behind the login. And maybe that will tease people into using a system which has got such great potential. Wait and see.
Any questions? Joe?
Just an observation, because I know how wonderful when you go is, and it's a shame then, because the fact that you can now search across a directory and you can see, you're beginning to see teachers across Scotland, and you're also being able to find things, find resources that other people have put in, that actually there's some real good stuff happening within what you've got, and I know it may move on to something else.
Oh no, I think that
but
will always be there.
You really see it happening. It really has transformed. And I think it's testament to a lot of the work you've done so far. It's just great.
That's largely the SharePoint portion you're talking about, and that's not really testament to what we're doing. We're working on that at the moment. They're figuring out how it's going to be used in the classroom. And all these tools, I think, right back to the old one, had fantastic potential. It's just getting them used and for the right things, getting them out in the open.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
First thing you log into is actually the portal eventually, which is RM Unify at the moment. But those of you who are familiar with Glue will realise there's some familiarities there. I thought the Scottish Government was slow. I mean the network, by the way. Well, I do both. RM Unify allows you to create your own tiles that takes you off to a range of places. Next stage of that is be able to create your own credentials within there. Eventually. This is the problem with being live, isn't it? There we go. So this is onto the launch pad. That's why we didn't do it live. For those of you who are familiar with Office 365 will realise that the ability to work within a browser for your Word, for your OneNote, I had to get OneNote, John, I just had to, for your Excel, for your presentation, that becomes important for those pupils who don't have access to the resources at home. There we go. So this is now logging me into Office 365 through Shibboleth, so open access. And again, this single login taking you into places becomes quite important. OneDrive with 25 gigabytes of storage for each user, 50 gigabytes in your email. Even I couldn't fill that one up, even. So the ability to have within here, I should do that blind on. Oh, I should have gone to that. Have you not seen the browser version of Word? Going to try and open in there. Yeah. This is the browser version of Word, so it allows me to work with loads of people online. Again, pupils understanding, and these are our principles that we want to work to, so that's why I put it up. And we can work with these, and pupils can get used to sharing, working on the one document. And yes, they can do that in Google Docs as well. It's about the process, not about the single tool. And I think that's something we need to get across to pupils as well. Any other questions? Yeah? John, I've been disappointed we had.
It's such a part of life as well. One thing I would say is, we both kind of talked about the notion of SharePoint being closed. That SharePoint isn't closed.
No, I said deliberately, John.
What was closed was the structure around it. And the reason for that is, and you've mentioned it already, and these are the problems you face, that the technology is the easy part, and it will be the easy part into the future. The hard part is getting the people who actually run the networks, who run the understand what you're trying to do and where you're going in terms of this openness agenda. You know, the original belief that old law was actually an open system.
Yeah.
A completely open system. But it was closed down by the individual local authorities. Now we can see that as a problem, or we can just simply see it as the reality of the life that we're facing at the time. And it's a political, it's a cultural, it's a social issue. It's not a technological issue. And you know, however wonderfully open you want the future law to be, it will remain closed while those same people are still running the networks, when you've still got network managers who think the only safe network is a network that isn't working, basically because nobody's using it. And you guys are working in the one that's actually probably the worst perpetration of that right now, that's Scottish Government. We don't know how to open the network up. So you're in a tough environment, you've got a hard job to do.
Thanks for that, John.
I think, John, we're very kind of focused on the idea that open is, it's in the principles. And some things, like I said, IP or child protection, or it might be just local conditions. We'll close that down.
Law is a completely different kettle of fish on, you know, the Glasgow Caledonian University network or the neighbour network of every university, because everyone who uses the network here is an adult.
Yeah.
Everyone, you know, the large majority of the people who use Go are under 16, under 17, under 18.
650,000 users under the age of 18.
Exactly. And you know, when we set up Go, it was the largest single SharePoint network in the world. And that was a challenge in itself.
It's still the second largest.
And it was actually split into two because of that. They couldn't make one big enough. So it's actually, technically, it's actually two separate SharePoint networks joined together.
I was just wondering about whether attitudes towards that sort of openness hasn't changed drastically since Glow was first launched.
I think culturally, society's moved on, but that's not necessarily true of the managers who control things and you know what their fears are.
But don't you get situations then where basically large chunks of your audience basically work around Glow, simply because?
In the office myself and John work in, Glow is the only common link between Education Scotland and Scottish Government. Right. So actually it's the only bit they can work together on, because although Education Scotland is now part of the Scottish Government, there are still two technological ICT differences, so they can't actually work together directly. I can't read the Education Scotland directive, find out where people are, that kind of thing. Glow is the only one that's actually shared between them. So it's kind of, as John describes it, it's forced us to eat our own dog food and actually use it within the Office 365. And the other thing is, this is not Glow, this is Office 365 accessed via Glow. And I think the idea of tools being accessed via permissioning model, authentication, all those kind of things becomes really important. And then, you're right, the culture's changed, people are more aware of apps, whether they know it or not, they use the words, or all those kind of things. And the next stage to that is them developing their own working practices. The office myself and John work in now has 60 people in it. They have a Scottish Government machine checking their email, and they have their own personal machine on the open Wi-Fi for everything else. So they had sitting with at least two. In fact, at one point I think I had 5 around me. It was getting ridiculous. So yes, you're right, they do work around. And it's the question is, how do we then make it so they don't have to work around but actually supports what they're trying to do? It supports learning and teaching in this case. And get teachers on board. And it is a very long-term technological thing. God, we could have never done that in 15 minutes, could we? No.
But I think that there's still a reluctance for teachers to share, and what we need to give them is this range of environments, from very closed to very open, so that we've got a space. Yep.
Just a wee thing you were saying on the reluctance to share thing, and that's something that we've run up against culturally at Glasgow Caledonian, and it's why we ended up writing the Open Educational Resources Policy. It was to allow the teaching staff to know where they stood, because they didn't really trust the managers. So they wanted something written down to know where they stood, to know that they wouldn't be looked down on or be done down for sharing. They wanted to know it was okay to share. So that's where our idea of writing the policy came from. It was to reassure the staff that it was going to be all right and nobody was going to pick on them for doing it.
We have read it a lot ourselves, and we want to join into that larger debate and larger communication about what does it mean, what are open standards, what is, how do you work fairly together? Is it an open Creative Commons we adopt? Is the government's pushing the OGL, which we're still trying to get the head around, the open government licence and how that works and what their problems are with that, and getting an understanding. But we do, as John said, need help and inputs, and that's what we're calling for now, I think.
I think that's a good point, actually, during your coffee break. Because after the coffee break, we're of course coming back to talk about the Scottish Open Education Declaration, which is that bit of trying to get a point out with all of our systems that spells out what open is, which we can then take back to government and to local authorities and to colleges and universities and see if there's a commonality about sharing. And so at that point, can I thank John and Ian kindly for your presentation. Super, thank you. And coffee is served. Okay, folks. Last session was from Lorna Campbell about the Scottish Open Declaration, and then we're due to have a plenary session after that. But I think we probably, because we've talked about openness all day, I think when we roll into the plenary session, I think we'll talk about the Scottish Open Education Declaration. But I think there's probably a lot of other open themes that we need to chat about, and just a special mention of affordances, as I know somebody at the back of the room has been collecting the amount of time that affordances has been mentioned. So I'm sure there's lots of affordances around open education. That's at least 3 or 4, John. Okay. Thank you. Laura.
Thanks very much, Joe. Sorry to drag you all away from the coffee and cakes, but I'll try and make this quite brief so we've got some time for discussion left at the end. So, as Joe mentioned, what I'm going to be talking about is the Scottish Open Education Declaration. Just a very brief bit of background first. My name's Lorna Campbell. I work for an organisation called CETUS, which is the Centre for Educational Technology, Interoperability and Standards. And we're a national UK advisory centre providing strategic, technical and pedagogic advice on education technology and standards to funding bodies, standards agencies, government institutions and commercial partners. So that's our boilerplate. So the Open Scotland Declaration is an initiative of Open Scotland. Now, we've been talking a lot about Open Scotland today without ever actually stopping to explain what Open Scotland is. It is a slightly sort of nebulous thing in that it's not a formal organisation in any way, shape or form. It's a cross-sector initiative that aims to raise awareness of open education, encourage the sharing of open educational resources, and explore the potential of open policy and practice to benefit all sectors of Scottish education. Open Scotland is an initiative that's led by CETUS, by SQA, by the JISC RSC Scotland, and by the ALT Scotland SIG, who are hosting this meeting today. It's an entirely voluntary initiative. It's entirely unfunded. We receive no funding from anyone for doing this. It's open to anyone. We encourage everyone to participate in this initiative. Now, one of the things that we did about this time last year was we ran a meeting called the Open Scotland Summit. And that was a very targeted meeting that brought together senior managers and policymakers to explore the development and the potential of open education policy and practice in Scotland. And that meeting took place at the National Museum of Scotland here in Edinburgh last June. And we were very lucky to have Dr. Cable Green from Creative Commons, who came over to Scotland to present our keynote for that event. We spent a large part of the day talking about how openness can help to address the strategic priorities and challenges facing all sectors of education. And in particular, we focused on the government's sort of big-ticket strategic agendas. So the post-16 education, knowledge transfer, curriculum change, and the whole area of school, college, university articulation. And I know a lot of these themes have been touched on today by many of our speakers. But one of the other things we did was we discussed the UNESCO Paris OER Declaration. Now, this was a document that was produced in 2012 by UNESCO in collaboration with the Commonwealth of Learning. And it's quite a short 2-page document. It's got a little bit of introductory text and about 10 points relating to support for open educational resources. And it's a nice document because it lays things out in very plain terms. It's very easy to identify with. And it's a wee bit sort of motherhood and apple pie. It's quite difficult to disagree with the UNESCO OER Declaration. There's nothing too contentious in there. So we used this as a talking point at the Open Scotland Summit to discuss whether it would be useful to use this to leverage more support for open education in Scotland and to raise awareness of the affordances of open education, there you go, there's another one, of open education right across all sectors of Scottish education. And there was general agreement from participants at the summit that this is a good thing. Yes, this is a good thing as far as it goes, but as the title suggests, it's completely focused on open education resources and nothing else. It doesn't talk about any other aspects of open education. It doesn't talk about open assessment, open policy, open practice, open online courses. It's just OER. So there was a suggestion that one activity that the Open Scotland Initiative would undertake was to draft a new version of the declaration that included open education more generally. So we went away and eventually we drafted the Scottish Open Education Declaration. Now what this is a reworking of the UNESCO Declaration. I did most of the original redraft, and we've put it online. It's hosted on an installation of WordPress on Reclaim Hosting, which is an initiative set up by Jim Groom in the US to provide open source server space for educational use. And we've used the Comment Press open source application to allow members of the community to comment on that open draft. Comment Press is developed by an organisation called the Institute of the Future of the Book. So we very much were using sort of open technology to host this and get it out there. So like I said, this is an open community draft. I mean, the fact that I did the original redrafting is irrelevant. It's up there as a straw man for the community to engage with and to discuss. And we've already had quite a lot of discussion there. When we put this online, we sent the URL out to all the various sort of OER and open education mailing lists, and the response was dramatic, to say the least. Everyone went, "Isn't it fabulous that Scotland has got behind an open education policy? Huge congratulations to the Scottish Government." This despite the fact we had gone out of our way to say this is a community draft. This is not an official document. It's not endorsed by the Scottish Government. It's not endorsed by SFC or by any of the institutions. It's a community draft. We hope that people will get behind it. We hope that maybe it will eventually filter up the chain. We don't know if it will. But if at least it provokes some discussion of open education, and if it helps to raise awareness of open education, then it will have been a modest success in that way. But it was quite interesting, the reaction it got, and it did make me wonder if perhaps there is an appetite for higher level open policy out there. I don't quite know the answer to that, but it did have quite a dramatic reception when it first went out there. But like I said, it is just a draft that is there for you to comment on. I'm not going to go through all the points in the declaration. Please do go and read it. Please do go and engage with it. But what I'm going to do is very quickly just flick through some of the comments that people have added in the hope that that might sort of spark some more discussion in addition to a lot of the points that we've already raised. What we did was, this is an example of a statement from the Paris OER Declaration. And this is an example of the same bullet point that has been expanded to include all aspects of open education. So that's just to give you some idea of how we've redrafted it. And we also wrote an introduction, and a lot of the language, a lot of the wording, a lot of the concepts are influenced very heavily by Scottish Government policy documents, because we really wanted this to echo Scottish Government policy. And this paragraph in particular has caused a lot of discussion and debate, most of it in the form of people endorsing and agreeing this, that there is, the whole point of education is for the greater good. It's about preparing people to become fully engaged digital citizens. And that's just an example of one of the comments that we've had on this paragraph of the introduction. Joe and his colleague Martin Ware have also picked up on this idea of education as a public good, and how we have a very strong tradition in Scotland of education for its own sake, and education that should be accessible to everybody regardless of their ability to pay. Another theme that was raised by my CETA's colleague Scott Wilson was whether it was worth including a statement on the use of open source software in education. And I sort of said to Scott, if you want to, if you want to draft a comment, sure, we'll add it in. So we now have a new bullet point on the use of open source software in education. One of the other themes that has been discussed quite widely is that the way the declaration is drafted, it does slightly sound as if it's technology that's driving development, that the technology is driving open education. And several people have commented that really what we want to do is turn that round a bit, so that technology is seen as the enabler rather than the driver of open education developments, and there's been quite a lot of discussion about this. Again, I'm not going to, you can go and have a look at the document and read through these at your own leisure. And Lee Ballantyne made a very interesting comment in agreement with this. Another very interesting point that was raised by Linda Craner was that what we really need is a major culture shift within education, that to actually really get behind the idea of open education. It's not about the technology, it's about building capacity. And I think this maybe comes back as well to the point I made earlier on during Ronnie's talk, that I think we do need to build capacity in the sector to be able to really get the benefits from open education that we know are there. And again, Ronnie picked up on that point that Linda raised in terms of, whether we're looking at a major culture shift or perhaps a slower evolution. And another interesting point that was raised by Martin Ware is that we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, it's cross-sector. This isn't just for higher education. It's not just for the college sector. It's not just for the school sector. It's for everyone. Open education has the potential to benefit all sectors of Scottish education. And we need to work more closely, and we need to work cross-sector as well. There's a lot of content, there's a lot of practice, there's a lot of experience in all these different sectors that we can learn from. And I think the fact that we actually have such good cross-sector representation here today is hugely encouraging. I mean, I'm very used to sort of standing and talking to people who are just from higher education. And, these are not the people that, we really want to be talking to. We want a real mix of people. And I think it's very encouraging to see that here today. So again, when we come to redrafting the declaration, hopefully we can really emphasise that point. Ronnie also made the point that Scotland's a wee place, and we should be able to do things because we're a small country. We should be able to get together and do things as a small country. And it's interesting to compare this with an initiative that's going on in Slovenia at the moment. Slovenia hosted the Open Courseware Consortium Conference this year, and they have just announced a government initiative called Opening Up Slovenia. And when questioned at the conference why they had chosen to do this, they said, we see ourselves as a big little country, and there's a lot that we can do because of our size that we hope will lead the way across Europe. And I think Scotland's got a lot to learn from that initiative. And one last comment, this is actually Malek Tarkowski, who is a Polish colleague who does a lot of work with Creative Commons and also with the school sector, and is involved in Open New Textbook for Schools initiative in Poland. And he suggested that, that we really need to endorse quite strongly the Creative Commons Attributions License. This is a very debatable point. Actually saying that, you must use X, Y, or Z license is quite a, that will spark a lot of discussion and debate. I'm unsure about this myself, but it's an interesting point to have been raised. So the declaration is still there. It's been online since about April. I haven't actually changed the original draft on the basis of any of the comments that have been received so far. But hopefully what we'll do within the next couple of months is we'll start to work in some of these comments. And then what we'll do is we will issue a second draft. So please do go in, do comment. The declaration is drafted under open license. Although I should add that when I went to use the original UNESCO declaration, I discovered I had no license on it at all. But as soon as I tweeted that, UNESCO were like, oh, sorry, yes, please use it, CC by attribution license. You can take this document, you can do whatever you want with it, you can redraft it, you can cut bits out of it, you can share it with your colleagues. It's there for you to use. It's a community resource. So please do go in, do comments, do get engaged with the discussion online. And if you do, please use our Open Scotland hashtag that we've also been using for this event. So that's it. I'm going to leave it there. And I think we've got about 15 minutes left for discussion or comment on any of the issues that I think we've been hearing about today.
We start off with questions for Lorna on Open Scotland.
Lorna, the declaration's been, you say you're about to start work on timescale does the group envisage before each does something and something happens?
Well, that's a good question, because as I said, this is completely unfunded and unsupported. So really this happens in our spare time. So to some extent, what happens when it's dependent on how much, slack that we can kind of carve out of the day jobs, and that goes for all of us, that goes for everyone who's involved in Open Scotland. So I would certainly hope that what we're in at the beginning of June now, based on my own commitments, end of July, at the very earliest.
And then are you looking for organisations, institutions, etc. to sign up to it?
Well, again, I mean, that's an interesting point as well. There is a comment in the document, there is a comment in the declaration where you can sign up. We didn't explicitly ask people to sign up, but some people have already done that. Some people have already said, well, I'll sign an institution up to that. Some individuals have signed it. Again, like I said, we have no authority to encourage people to do that. We can put that out there, we can encourage them to do it, but I don't want to make promises.
I'd encourage you to support the principles of this quite simple declaration, to sign up to the principles. If you have caveats, put your caveats on this too, so don't sign up to everything. If you're saying, I agree with most of it, apart from paragraph 2 or paragraph 3, then add that. My sense of the policy landscape in Scotland is there won't be any big decisions made around about anything like this until November or January next year, because there's other big things happening. But I do sense that in January or thereabouts next year, regardless of outcomes around these kind of things, we will still have that small community that needs to share things, and something like this needs to happen. In the interim, between all our talk around Open Scotland and all these things, Wales just did it. Wales Higher Education have got, and it's worth going and having a look, have an open declaration, but it's just for higher education. But at least they've done it. They've said that the penny dropped. We're now obliged to share publicly funded research openly. So why don't we just do it with the materials? So Wales have done it. It's a fantastic document. It's worth having a look at. But it's just higher education. Wouldn't it be great if we could do it higher, further, and schools? And schools are more complicated because you're into COSLA and the local employment terms and conditions and all those kind of things. But it's doable. But I don't think we'll get a policy move until early in the year. But it will come, and again, at the highest level, Mike Russell and various other people, as we were doing some of this, showed very, very strong signs of interest in all of this. But then it all went quiet. But I think the reason it's all gone quiet is just simply there's a bigger item on the national agenda between now and Christmas. Is that? Yeah, but I urge you all. I mean, all of you get get your names on this if you wish to. No, it's not compulsory. If you're interested in this, get your name or get your institution to support this.
I'm just following up on that, and we've talked a lot about culture change and the hardest thing to change is culture. And I think maybe this is an example of that, because we're waiting for the Scottish Government to get this sign of approval. And if we all collectively, as an education sector, could say, we've done it, then they have to come to us. So maybe that's what instead of waiting.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly one of the original drivers for this, as you know. So, I mean, Sheila's been involved in this from the off as well. But, there was this hope that if we can sort of push from the ground up, that, the government will start to take notice. And as Joe said, I think we are, there are some glimmers of interest up there. So hopefully, we can keep pushing and keep getting behind initiatives like this. And all the sort of other activities that Open Scotland have been doing, like the Open Scotland Summit, like this event hosted by all the other activities going on. But interest will continue to increase across the sector. So.
And again, while we are doing things like this, moving things on, some of the Scandinavian countries are moving to open by default. You've got the Open Welsh Declaration. There's a whole list of countries now. You have a look at Creative Commons. The Slovenian event was an event led by the Slovenian government, saying that they're going to adopt open education across universities, colleges, and schools. I'm meant to be cheering.
non-publicly funded bodies.
Like publishers, presumably?
What's that?
Like publishers maybe, or is that what you mean? Private sector schools.
I'm trying to think who came to the summit last year.
It was another publisher, I think it was a publisher did something.
We certainly welcome it, anyone. I mean,
No, but in the middle of the declaration, you always seem to be talking about publicly funded bodies.
Yes.
To my mind, that starts to sound a bit like a practicality. Resources amongst themselves.
No, I see your point. I mean, absolutely. And again, I think there are things that the private sector could be doing. But I mean, almost within, and I'll use that public sector cartel, if you like, beyond further higher education schools. We know, for instance, that NEST, the National Health Service, has tremendous learning resources, which they share only on a very patchy basis with schools and universities. So that to me, again, within the public sector bailiwick is a place where Open Scotland should be reaching into the NHS. Historic Scotland's got lots of quite interesting resources too, some of them which are firewalled, and it's around the specialist skills for restoration workers and things. And again, that should be shared with the colleges that are training people to do that kind of stuff. So there's quite a few pockets of quite interesting content.
The important thing about what you just said was, sounds like the private sector sharing things among themselves, and it's absolutely not among themselves. It's sharing with everybody.
yeah.
So commercial publishers, private schools, they would be
That's why I was
sharing
asking the
with
question.
anybody else. The question is, would they sign up to share what they've got?
I mean, we certainly, when we ran the summit in Edinburgh last year, we did invite representatives from Historic Scotland, from the National Museums of Scotland, from the sort of heritage sector, from the National Library. The National Library did actually attend. We didn't directly invite any commercial publishers, for example, but all this stuff is out there, all this stuff is open. So, anyone who wants to engage with us, we would welcome with open arms, absolutely.
I suppose just in the global space, it's interesting to look at what Pearson and some of the other big global publishers are doing. Because in fact, what they're doing is they're collecting up a lot of this open stuff that's existing around the world and keeping that a bit open, but then inside it, continuing to stay under the private content, which is their commercial model. So there are private companies around the world engaging with
and it's interesting that during the hefty funded UK Open Education Resources Programme that ran between 2009 and 2012, some of those projects did partner with commercial publishers. And there was a project at the University of Newcastle that partnered with Elsevier to produce open educational resources out of Elsevier content. So there are certain publishers out there, that are willing to engage, and the more the merrier, absolutely.
I think one of the things that could happen is the public sector in this part of the world start to contribute directly to the millennium goals, to start to education as a human right, not as a public good in this country.
Yeah, as a human right, a global human right. Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
It's open, it's for everyone, it's not just for Scotland, it's open as open.
No, I mean, even when I'm talking about public good, I think I'm talking about it being a global public good, which again, back to why lots of people get involved with this wonderful Scottish education system, is it was about taking education to the world, even,
There's an interesting, when the UKOER programme kicked off in England, we had some very interesting reactions when potential projects were told that the resources they created had to be completely open. And the reaction we got usually kind of went, what you mean within the university sector? And I went, no, everyone. What you mean within the UK? No, everyone. You mean everyone? I said, yes, absolutely everyone. And somebody came up with a phrase about the agoraphobia of openness. And that to get over this hurdle, but when you say open, you mean anyone can use it, anyone in the world, anyone, anywhere. And I think there is a kind of like a bit of a hurdle to get over there. And I think maybe there are phases that people have to go through and that institutions have to go through to reach that point. And there's quite often a tendency to want to share within walled gardens. And I think you can get people who can be quite hardline about that and say, well, there's no point doing it, we should everyone. But I think there are phases you have to go through, and you've got to build up that capacity, you've got to raise awareness of openness. And I know that Sheila mentioned Cable's comment at the end of the Open Scotland Summit about the opposite of the opposite of open is not closed, the opposite of open is broken. I mean, that's a very powerful statement to end a keynote with. Of course you can argue with it, because you know, it's very difficult for any institution to just suddenly go open. There are steps, there are processes, there are culture changes, and as you know, Linda quite rightly sort of commented on the declaration, you know, we need to foster that culture change toward more openness, and I think that is, you know, it's not going to happen overnight, but you know, we need to support it how we can.
And I think hopefully too, a large part of the Open University project to build that, to create that culture.
Can I make a suggestion? During our presentation, Ronnie posed a number of questions about what do we mean when we say open, you know, in various contexts. And I just wonder if from this meeting you might also recommend to the project we're funding that they try and adopt as many of these principles as they can in taking forward the project. And we might find that some of them people are uncomfortable with, which either produces some feedback on the wording, or by applying them quite rigorously, we end up with the best possible project we can. But since the project was directly, you know, requested by the Cabinet Secretary, I guess in doing that work we can report back to him and we can highlight the relevance of this declaration. And if it seems to be working well, then I think we've got some momentum there.
And I know that one of the other things that certainly we've spoken about is the next step that would be really useful to do would be to start to evidence each of these statements with you know, examples right across Scotland, because I bet we actually could evidence most of it. I bet if you actually went to every single one of those, you could find some evidence somewhere across the Scottish education sector of people really getting behind each and every one of these statements. So yes, absolutely.
That'd be hugely useful.
Very much so.
Any other questions? So on today, questions about open and all of these things. How do we get the rest of the world into the same mindsets that you will have? Because that's why, hopefully that's why you came along. How do we get everybody, how do we get the rest of the education world into this space? How do we get the manacles off?
I guess we have to give them a reason to care. And that's the hard part. We need to think through what it means to care about this, why it's important. If people don't care about it, then they're not going to be persuaded either way.
I was at an event in Dundee yesterday, the ALT Scotland conference, and to my shame I can't actually stand, so I don't know what it stands for. It's a library institute. It's the big library conference. The keynote was by the director of the Carnegie Trust, and he was announcing a new Carnegie initiative, Carnegie funding initiative. It's all about sort of public libraries. But one of the things he said was that, you know, he's worked in sort of various public sectors over the years, and in his experience it was better to campaign for something rather than against something. And he really believed in something. You need to know. It's not about saying what it does, but what it's for. And I think again, you know, in terms of openness, you know, we really need to show, you know, what are the benefits of openness, you know, what are the pain points that openness can address, and that's certainly the things that we started trying to do at the meeting we had this time last year, was like looking at these sort of strategic policy areas and say, well, how can openness help to address that? And I think articulation is a really interesting one, because that transition from school to college to university, you know, in that space there should be huge affordances for all types of openness, open educational resources, open, you know, forms of assessment and accreditation. And I think it's, you know, perhaps looking at these targeted areas that perhaps we can make some convincing arguments.
And I think too, you know, that bit of mapping things, some of the building blocks for all of this are already here. You know, the work that JISC has done really over the last sort of almost 15 years actually, has all really been about open practice. For higher education, you know, the JORM does exist. For further education in Scotland, and maybe for more than further education in Scotland, you know, there's a so-called resource. You know, it exists, it's there. So some of these bits about, well, if I'm going to be open, where do I put my stuff? Actually, these questions are answered already. You know, and again, there might be some institutions that are already just quietly populating these places, and maybe it's just to look at what the practices are, how practices have changed in some of these institutions to allow that flow. And actually, in fairness, going the other way, maybe to help Resource and JORM understand how customers use the resources. So these systems get cleverer in delivering learning materials to teachers, or maybe sometimes directly to learners. There's maybe things in there too that we're not doing yet.
Just to highlight the fact what Lorna was saying about transitions. You might know there's a new QAA enhancement theme for the next year or so. It's going to be transitions, student transitions. So that might be a lever for some of us in universities to engage colleagues within the institutions to show that we're doing something in that area, and the openness can help with these transitions. So it might be something to factor in, because we're all tasked with doing something around the QA enhancement theme. So one thing. The other thing, just to go back again to something that Sheila was talking about, in trying to map our institutional policies perhaps against this, and trying to convince senior managers of the institution that openness can have an impact in helping us to achieve some of our institutional targets and goals. And that's what usually gets senior managers hooked in. If they can see a benefit to university branding, reputation, marketing, etc., then that's another benefit.
And it was certainly it was very interesting to be in Slovenia earlier on this year and to see the level at which the Opening Up Slovenia initiative was launched, because I mean that was really at the highest government level. I mean, they made a real song and dance about it. How successful they'll be remains to be seen. I think it's one that we really ought to watch with interest. But it was really interesting to see that at a really high level, and somebody had obviously done that job of convincing the institutions and convincing the government at higher levels. So yes, I think that's what we need to do.
The question comes about the previous answer. Has anyone looked at the perspectives of marketing, of the university's marketing division, on how they would see this? Because obviously brand awareness, they spend money on raising brand awareness. Has there been any research in terms of attaching a monetary value to the type of brand awareness that gains?
I think the people to ask that question of would be MIT and the Open University.
Yeah, the experts.
That point did come up in Martin Bean's presentation, and he basically said every pound they've invested in MOOCs delivered far more brand awareness than all the money they spent on marketing.
I mean, I can only speak about Open Learn, but I mean, certainly the way that Open Learn is now strategically placed, obviously it was initially funded as part of various philanthropic giving, but now, strategically it's very much placed in relation to journeys from informal to formal learning, and actually creating that gateway for people who have been distanced from education in all sorts of ways to engage in informal learning and leading them into formal learning. So it really is part of that brand awareness and marketing, and it's really seen as being integral to the university's strategy to widen participation.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, are there people here from this university's MOOC project? But certainly Jeff Laywood will say that one of the reasons why they got involved with Coursera was publicity. That was one of the drivers. Now I know there's a big difference between MOOCs and open educational resources, because most MOOCs aren't open. It's highly debatable how open they are. But I think if you look at the sort of publicity that Edinburgh got from partnering with Coursera, and all credit to them. I think the way they've opened access to the data that these courses have generated is really good. But I think there's a big publicity win for the first Scottish institution that says, right, we're opening access to our content. And it may not even be an education institution. If you look at what National Portrait Gallery have done, the British Museum have done, they have opened access to their digital collections. Some of the big US institutions have done it as well, and they've got a lot of publicity from doing that. So
is the evidence for this in one place, so you can take it and go back to the institution and show the someone and say, look, here's a good reason to do this?
Yeah. Well, certainly the JISC actually did fund a study on business models for open educational resources, which is called Good Intentions, and it was written by Lou McGill, who is based here in Scotland. If you Google Good Intentions JISC OER, it should turn up. That report is a couple of years old now, but a lot of the content in it will still be relevant.
Yeah, well, something that just occurs to me in terms of pushing this forward. I'm talking through, so just tell me at what point I start to talk rubbish. But it seems to me that certain aspects of open have established and mature practices as well as platforms to go with it. Specifications to some extent, at least. Open source, definitely. Arguably, education, we're getting there a little bit with MOOCs. But with things like policy and content, we haven't really got that yet. The actual process or the generally recognizable practice or platform isn't really there yet.
Well, I think the people to do that is Giles and the Power Up people.
Right.
Because that's very much one of the things that the Power Up project's looking at, is that, you know, that platform for open education policy. So, but you're right, I mean, it's early days.
But also OER, I think.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, open knowledge, you've got Wikipedia, obviously, but OER per se, there's not really a recognisable place in communities to do that yet.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a bit too diverse for there to be one community in the same way that there perhaps are for others. I don't know. It's an interesting point. Certainly interesting point.
Will I wind up at that point in your mind? Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to you all for coming along. I'm going to mention a few other things. First of all, if you're interested in this debate, I hope you'd like to join us at ALT SIG, which is in Warwick this year in September. I hope you'd also all like to consider becoming members of the Association for Learning Technology. It is really worth doing, and you do get to meet lots of interesting people, and you do get to talk about these community issues that are affecting really education, not just in the UK but globally. The other co-sponsor of this event was CETUS. CETUS are having their conference in Bolton, and I'm going to forget the dates in June.
Yeah, it's look after next. It's 16th and 17th.
No, 17th and 18th.
17th and 18th. I think today might be the last day to register.
So if you're so that whole idea about standards, about these standards that underpin education, then that's the event.
But we are having a debate on education policy as well, which some of the suspects here will be at.
And again, OER 15 is next year in Cardiff. So again, if you're interested in actually going to Wales to hear how they're getting on with their open education policy, I think it'll be really quite interesting to see, having made their declaration, if university behaviours have changed in any way. You know, because one thing, talking the talk, sometimes it's harder to walk the walk. And finally, Martin, do you want to say a few?
I think you covered it in June's June mentioned the open conference. I would say, just in case you don't know, obviously I work for ALT, but I'm based in Scotland, so seeing as you're a Scottish representative for ALT, and I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to join the ALT Scotland SIG. Just tweet it out the link quickly so people can join it. And also join the debate on Open Scotland.
Yes, and make use of that hashtag. That hashtag is for everyone to use. Adopt it. Give it a go.
Well, sorry, Joe. Well, I think I was going to steal your thunder. I'd like to thank all our presenters today, and thank you for coming and joining us. Thank you, Dean, Tim Clarence, and Joe today. Anything else?
That's perfect. Thank you.